Have you ever noticed how anxiety never arrives all at once? It creeps in slowly through small, seemingly harmless behaviors. The problem is that these signs, if ignored, end up showing that fear has already taken over. And when anxiety takes over, life ceases to be lived. It becomes merely endured. Most people think they're just tired or overwhelmed. But the Bible warns us to be vigilant because the enemy often acts silently, slowly stealing our peace. There are two very clear behaviors that reveal when anxiety is already set in, and if you learn to identify them, you can break the cycle before it's too late. And if this message has already resonated with you, I invite you to follow the channel, because every click you make helps this word reach more people who are trapped in cycles of fear and anxiety and who need, just as much as you do, to discover that God has already promised a peace that surpasses all understanding. Anxiety never arrives loudly. It creeps in subtly, in small signs that seem too common to attract attention. It's the racing heart for no reason, the deep sigh that brings no relief, the mind that insists on spinning before bed. These signs, when ignored, build up until the weight becomes unbearable. Many people believe they're just tired, that a good night's sleep will solve it. But the truth is, the body and mind are already trying to warn us that something isn't right. And the problem is that as we get used to this discomfort, we start to treat as normal what is actually a warning sign. The Bible says the heart knows its own bitterness. Only you know what you're carrying, even if no one else notices. The challenge is recognizing when these signs are no longer fleeting but constant. Because that's when anxiety stops being a guest and starts wanting to take over the house. And if it's already started to take hold, what's the next step? The scariest thing about anxiety isn't when it appears in intense flare-ups, but when it creeps in silently. Its grip begins small, an avoided commitment, a postponed decision, a worry that won't go away. Gradually, routine begins to revolve around this constant fear, and the person no longer lives, they merely survive. This domain is invisible because on the outside, everything appears normal. From the outside, one sees someone productive, talking, working, smiling. But inside, the heart is heavy, the mind is tired, and the body is already showing signs of wear and tear. The invisible begins to become unbearable, yet the person insists on hiding it. The Bible warns, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by anything." When anxiety rules our steps, it has become a cruel master. The big question is, how can we identify when we are no longer in control, but this silent enemy called anxiety? One of the clearest signs that anxiety is taking over someone is constant avoidance. The person begins to avoid encounters, responsibilities, and commitments that were once straightforward. There's always an excuse. I'm not ready. Today's not a good day, maybe tomorrow. But deep down, what's happening is that fear has taken over. Each time the escape is repeated, the heart learns to retreat before even trying. The mind creates an illusion of protection, but the truth is that each step away gives more power to anxiety. Running away doesn't solve the problem, it only reinforces the feeling of helplessness. Life slowly shrinks, and the prison closes in from the inside out. The Bible gives the example of Elijah, who after winning a great battle, fled into the desert in fear. He ran not because he was weak, but because in that moment, anxiety and fear became greater than his faith. Running away doesn't define who we are, but it shows how much we're letting fear get the better of us. And if we're already living like this, where will this escape lead us? Avoidance is never an isolated act. It creates a pattern, a cycle that repeats itself until it becomes a habit. At first, it's simply avoiding a difficult conversation. Then, it's declining an invitation. Later, it's giving up entire dreams because the fear of failure gets the better of them. By the time they realize this, they've already built a life based on avoiding everything that seems challenging. The problem with this cycle is that it fuels anxiety itself. With each situation avoided, the mind registers, "You can't do it." This reinforces the lie that we're incapable of coping. It's like watering the wrong seed. The more we avoid it, the more the fear takes root until it becomes a tree that's difficult to uproot. But the Bible shows that this cycle can be broken. Joshua heard from God, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed." The invitation was not to flee, but to face it with courage, because God's presence was with him. What would happen if instead of fleeing, we chose to take a step of faith? Gideon is a vivid portrait of how fear can imprison us. He was hidden, threshing wheat inside a wine press, a cramped and unsuitable place because he was afraid of his enemies. This scene shows someone living the cycle of escape. Instead of being free in the fields, he worked in secret, overcome by the anxiety of being attacked. But it was right there, in hiding, that God presented himself to him with unexpected words. "The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor." Gideon saw himself as the least, weak and limited. But God saw him as someone capable of changing the history of a people. Fear said, "You can't." But God's voice said, "You have been chosen." This teaches us that flight doesn't define identity. Gideon didn't stop being brave just because he was hiding. He just hadn't yet believed what God said about him. Likewise, our anxiety doesn't have to be the final word on who we are. But have we listened more to the lies of fear or the truth of the promise? If flight shows someone paralyzed by fear, excessive control shows someone trying to overcome anxiety through total control. This is the person who needs to plan every detail, anticipate every step, calculate every possibility. This isn't a healthy organization. It's a desperate attempt to avoid surprises. Fear of the unknown becomes a master who never rests. This behavior is deceptive because on the outside it appears to be discipline, but on the inside the mind never finds peace. Every unexpected event becomes a threat. Every change becomes a cause for despair. And the more the person tries to control it, the more they discover they can't. This increases anxiety and creates an endless cycle of frustration. The Bible reminds us, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. When we try to hold the future in our hands, we forget that it never belonged to us. Excessive control is not a sign of strength, but of fear. The big question is, how long will we insist on carrying a weight that only God can hold? Excessive control becomes an invisible prison. People wake up already planning everything that could go wrong and spend the day trying to avoid any surprises. Deep down, fear guides every decision. It's like living in a minefield, always waiting for the next explosion, always on high alert. This kind of life robs us of lightness. There's no room for rest or spontaneity. The mind is always busy, the body is tired, and the soul finds no rest. The more a person tries to control, the more they realize they can't. The result is profound emotional and spiritual exhaustion. The Bible shows the difference between trying to control everything and learning to trust. Jesus said, "Each day has enough trouble of its own." In other words, live one day at a time, because carrying tomorrow is a burden that destroys. Excessive control is just another form of slavery. But are we willing to let go of this false control to experience the freedom of trust? Escape and control seem like opposites, but they are actually twins born of the same parent, fear. Those who escape try to avoid pain by hiding. Those who control try to prevent pain by taking control of everything. In the end, both reveal that anxiety has ceased to be a passing fad and has become the ruler of life. Often the same person alternates between the two behaviors. One day they decline invitations and opportunities, withdrawing from everything out of insecurity. Next, they demand that everything go their way, desperate to maintain a sense of security. This alternation is even more exhausting because the heart never finds balance. The Bible shows that this is not the way, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. If we are living between running away and controlling, we are trapped in a cycle that did not come from the Lord. The big question is, how many of us are wasting energy on extremes without realizing that we were once called to live in balance? One of the greatest dangers of anxiety is denial. The person insists that everything is fine, that it's just fatigue, that they just need a few more days of rest. But deep down, they already know that fear has taken up too much space. The heart, deceitful by nature, prefers to hide the truth rather than face the pain. This denial becomes a high wall. Instead of seeking help, the person closes themselves off. Instead of opening their hearts, they choose the mask of "I'm fine," and so anxiety grows, protected by silence. What can be treated early becomes a deep root, difficult to pull out. The problem isn't feeling anxiety, but pretending it doesn't exist. The Bible declares the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? This verse warns us that we cannot trust our feelings alone. We need to confront the truth with the light of the Word. What would happen if, instead of denial, we chose confession before God? Silence may seem like a way to cope, but in reality it weighs more heavily than the problem itself. When anxiety grows hidden, it becomes even stronger. The body begins to scream with symptoms: insomnia, pain, fatigue. The mind becomes overwhelmed with thoughts, and the soul gradually loses hope. This silence is not a cure. It's a slow poison. Many remain silent for fear of disturbing others because they believe no one will understand. But the truth is that while we don't speak, anxiety builds ever higher walls around our hearts. What began as a nuisance becomes an invisible prison. The Bible reminds us, when I kept silent about my sins, my bones wasted away through my groaning. The principle is the same. What we hide inside destroys us on the outside. Silence weighs more heavily than speech. The question is, how long will you carry alone what you could have already given to God? God never called us to carry the weight of anxiety alone. On the contrary, the Bible gives us a clear invitation. Cast all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you. It's not just part of the anxiety, not just what seems big, but all of it. This surrender is the path to true liberation. Surrendering doesn't mean giving up on life. It means trusting in the one who has control over everything. It means saying, Lord, I can't do it alone, but I know you can. It's letting go of the illusion that through escape or control we'll be able to live in peace. Peace doesn't come from human effort, but from trust in divine care. This invitation is made daily. With each new sign of fear, God calls us to lay at His feet whatever is weighing us down. Anxiety wants to dominate, but the Father wants to care for us. What will you choose? Continue carrying it until it breaks, or cast this burden into His hands right now? When anxiety takes over, the heart never rests. It's always on alert, always imagining the worst. But when we choose to trust in God, something changes. It's as if an invisible wall is erected around the mind. Fear tries to enter but finds no more space. This rest doesn't come from controlling everything, but from surrendering control to the one who never fails. Running away tires controlling, wears you down, but trusting renews you. That's why Isaiah wrote, You, Lord, will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is steadfast, because he trusts in you. The rest of trust doesn't depend on circumstances, but on the certainty that God cares for every detail, even the ones you can't see. It is in this place of surrender that life begins to change. The heart finds lightness, the mind finds calm, and the soul finds rest. Anxiety loses its power when it discovers it no longer has control. But then the question arises, how can we transform this surrender into daily practice, not just theory? Anxiety takes advantage of the seconds you hesitate. Your heart races, your mind races, and before you know it, fear has built a storm. Therefore, the key is not to wait for it to pass, but to react immediately. Prayer is this act of breaking the cycle at the very moment it begins. Praying immediately doesn't have to be long or elaborate. It can be a simple, Lord, I trust in you, said through tears. It can be a sigh transformed into surrender. Every time you react like this, you show that you're not willing to let anxiety dictate the rules. You change the direction of your thoughts before they become a prison. The Bible teaches, pray without ceasing. This doesn't mean living on your knees all day, but transforming every sign into an opportunity to speak to God. This practice creates a spiritual reflex. Instead of running away or controlling, you pray, and it is through this repetition that the heart is trained to live in peace. But what happens after this practice becomes a lifestyle. The peace God offers doesn't depend on external circumstances. It's not the absence of problems, but His presence in the midst of the storm. The Bible promises, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This promise isn't poetic. It's real, and it's been experienced by thousands before us. It's a peace that makes no sense to the world. While logic would dictate you should be desperate, you find rest. While everything suggests fear, you feel calm. This is the peace that cannot be explained in words, only experienced. It comes not from human effort, but from the Spirit that dwells within you. When immediate prayer becomes practical, this peace ceases to be a distant promise and becomes a daily experience. The anxious heart discovers a new rhythm, that of trust. But one final question remains. If this peace is already available, what is missing for it to truly reign in your life? There comes a time when anxiety no longer needs to be the dominant voice in your life. It may knock at the door, but it no longer finds entry. The heart that has learned to surrender in prayer and trust in God's care discovers that fear has lost its power. The cycle of escape and excessive control no longer dictates the rules. This is the end of dominion, when you no longer live by anxiety but by faith. It doesn't mean you'll never have worries again, but they no longer have the power to paralyze you. Your heart finds freedom, your mind finds rest, and your life aligns with the promise of peace that God has already declared. The Bible says, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. True freedom is not the absence of problems, but the presence of Jesus in every detail. The grip of anxiety ends when you choose to live guided by trust. The question now is, will you allow this freedom to be your new story? Anxiety will always try to trick you. It will tell you that running away is safer, or that controlling everything is the only way out. But now, both of these behaviors are signs that it's already taking over. The good news is that you don't have to live like this anymore. God has already offered you a way out to hand over the burden to Him and trust in the care that never fails. The cycle only ends when you decide to react differently. Instead of running away, choose to stay. Instead of controlling, choose to trust. Instead of remaining silent, choose to pray. It is in this daily decision that the grip of anxiety ends and the peace promised by the Word begins to reign in your heart. So I challenge you, apply this today. At the next sign of fear, pray immediately. Transform each morning into an encounter with God. And follow this channel, because here you'll find messages that strengthen your faith and remind you that fear doesn't have the final say. The Lord of Peace does.